Hi, this is Jason Burnett with Isla Transfers, and I'm going to demonstrate how to apply an Isla Transfer custom designed triangulose on a preformed clay object. As you can see here, we have a head, and I'm going to decorate essentially the headdress of the form. The clay right now is about leather hard, advanced leather hard. There's enough moisture content in the clay still to absorb the layers of slip that need to be applied. The tools that I have that I'm going to be working with before we begin, I'm going to show you. I have a Mudtools red rib and a Mudtools yellow rib. I'm using Isla Transfers pink slip and a white slip, as well as two brushes. I'm going to use about a 1 inch to 2 inch hake brush and another small brush that will absorb slip content pretty well. The print that we're going to be using comes in a sheet that's about yay large, and I have cut it down to hit the area with a little extra of where I want to apply it onto the head. And with this part of the process, what I appreciate is that I'm gonna are the wrinkles in the folding that will happen from the transfer itself. So first step is going to be applying 3 coats, generous coats of pink slip to the headdress. So as you see here, here's the pre-cut paper, and using the smaller brush, I'm going to apply white slip into some of these triangles down below. All this white slip will fall behind the lines when transferred over. And just like with the 3 coats that I applied onto the head, I'll apply at least 2 generous coats, maybe 3 coats of white slip onto the paper. I'm going to let that sit for a second. Right now there's a sort of a glossiness to it, and that's the water content in it. Just like with clay being wet and leather hard, I'm going to allow for the paper to absorb some of that moisture. And I want the slip that's going to be on the paper to be more of like a suede, have a sheen to it. That tackiness of the slip will allow for it to really absorb into the slip that's on the clay head. And looking at the surface of the slip, I'm going to go ahead and touch it so y'all can see what I'm talking about. The slip itself, I'm looking for, when I'm working, I like for the slip to still be moist to the touch, but not tacky, but enough where you still feel the moisture. So right here, as you can see, some of the slip came off on my finger. I could go ahead and apply here if I wanted to and just really let it sit a bit longer. I could take a hairdryer to it or a heat gun to it to help harden it a little bit more. But the important thing to really help with the transfer to stick to the surface of the clay, you want that moisture. So if you're trying Isla Transfers for the first time, maybe order an extra sheet or a sheet that you have cut up. Practice, experiment with transferring where the slip on both the paper and the slip on your clay work are at different stages between wet and leather hard. You're going to get different variations of transfers. That could be really exciting. That can give you really neat results because again, you're working with the material when it's still wet, leather hard, giving you enough wiggle room to play. For the transfer, the slip on the paper now has a sheen, but it's no longer like glossy and wet. And so this is a great opportunity. Now is the time that I would want to go ahead and apply moisture to the print. To do so, I'm going to spritz the back of the paper first with a Flairosol water mister. So now I'm going to take the paper. The slip, as you can see, is more of a, the slip on the paper is now more of a sheen than it is wet and glossy. So the moisture is still there, which is what I want. You don't want the slip on the paper before you transfer to dry thoroughly. This has the tack that it needs to apply to the slip that has been brushed onto the clay piece. So to do so, the underglaze that has been printed onto the paper needs to be rehydrated. And so I'm going to take some water using my Flairosol spray, which is like a spray bottle, but designed differently where it's more of a mist that comes out. Again, that is called a Flairosol bottle. You can also use travel size hair bottles, spritzers. And what I prefer, why I like those is that it doesn't douse the paper in water. Instead, it gives it a nice breath of moisture all over. Once I can see the underglaze lines come through the paper, that's when I know it has enough moisture. And that's what it should, that's the back side, so you can see the lines coming through. Now I'm going to go ahead and spray the front side. So now the paper and the slip has been rehydrated. I need to let it set for the paper and the underglaze to absorb that ink. So the whole thing is now a consistency of sort of a suede. At this time, I usually just wait. I wait for the paper and the slip on the head to become cohesive. When it's more of a leather hard, again, both are that suede-like surface where they're tacky, and the slip doesn't come off really to the touch of the finger. That's the best time that I find to apply them. You can apply them now while they're wet and just don't handle it, don't touch it, don't burnish it, nothing. But that's not the way I recommend. So right now I'm just going to give it a second for the slip to become a little bit more leather hard and the paper, the transfer, to become a little bit leather hard as well. All right, so right now the slip on the head is leather hard. Now it's to the right touch. Very little slip is coming off on my fingers. That's great. And the same thing goes with the image transfer, is that it's like suede. It's starting to slowly get back to that natural newsprint color, but right now there's enough moisture content for everything to transfer nicely. The tricky part with the transfers is that it's sort of a one-shot deal. Once you place it down and it touches the clay, if you peel it up, you might ruin either part of where the slip has been brushed on the surface or some of the image might peel off. So I'm going to sort of bounce out where I want this to go. And I really just work with the material. I allow it to do its thing. I try not to fight it. So as it wants to go down, how do I guide it? It's pretty smooth right now. And I'm using my fingers really just to get it into place. The tricky part is going to be where the headdress sort of folds back. So I want my clear line to go from the center down. I'm just making choices as I'm working and allowing the paper to fold and crease the way that it wants to naturally. That is one of the sort of the process marks that I think is beautiful about this technique. What got me started on it, or to really appreciate it, was kind of like Christmas presents when you have the wrapping paper around it, especially if it's not just a box, and how the patterns crease and fold on themselves, as well as clothing. Shirt looks a lot different on a clothes hanger than it does when someone's wearing it and sitting down. So it's pretty much all in place. I'm also feeling for, again, that moisture. There doesn't seem to feel like there's any trapped moisture in between. When I go to burnish with a rib, if there is trapped moisture between the underglaze transfer and the slip, or any wet slip, and I go to burnish with a rib, it's going to move the image underneath or move the slip underneath. So everything right now feels stable in place. But again, there's still moisture, but not enough to distort anything. So I'm just going to go through now and just burnish gently, moving air bubbles and getting a nice sort of seal with the red Mudtools rib. Where there's air bubbles, I'm going to work around that area a little bit more. If I can push the air bubbles out, great. Sometimes if I just need to really get rid of it, if there's a print that I'm using with a lot of detail, I'll try to take an X-Acto knife and just pierce through the paper enough to allow the air to escape. If you have watched any of my old demos or old videos, I used to brush slip all over the image and all over the leather hard piece. Now I just find I'll apply slip on the image when I want to do this sort of technique, where the more the monoprinting, the monotype technique, where if I brush a lot of slip over the image and a lot of slip onto the piece, sometimes I'll trap air bubbles. So I've done away with that, and I just now hydrate using the little mister, the Flairosol bottle, to get enough in there. So you can see what's happening on the top here. You can see where the paper's sort of bunching and wrinkling on the side. So I'm still going to burnish that down a bit. You can try to move away the paper and get underneath those creases, but sometimes just working with what you've got, the image won't transfer completely, and that leaves you with a nice sort of distressed surface, or allowing the eye sort of to fill in what's missing. It's really an aesthetic choice. It's up to you. And I encourage you to really just play and practice on test pieces before really committing to a larger piece. Once it feels pretty burnished with the red rib, and I know that no more of it really can do anything good, I'm going to move to the yellow rib. What I like about the yellow rib is the durometer is a bit thicker, so it's a hardier rib. And this is where I feel that this rib will burnish the image into the clay, into the slip. And the other thing that does that is just time and allowing the clay to absorb the moisture through the paper to the image onto the slip. If you're in a very humid condition, sometimes it may take longer. If you're in dry conditions, the stuff might speed up super quick. But one of the things that I've learned through this process and working with other people is that this is also a good time where if I was finished burnishing it and didn't want to work any more on it, I could essentially wrap it up or put it in a damp box and let this sit overnight. And I've seen that the results are really good the next day when you go in to peel this off. Personally, I'm more of an impatient type and I want to take it off now. One of the parts of the process that I love with this is seeing the colors in the image coming through. Even though there's paper on it, you're getting an idea of what to expect. So how do we know when it's ready? That's an important question, because you don't want to just peel it right off the piece. You want to sort of test it to see how the release is going. So if there's too much moisture that you may not feel that's underneath, sometimes the image isn't ready to come off the paper. And again, that's when sometimes you just want to wait and allow the moisture and the clay slip and image to balance out. It can be a little bit aggravating, but again, patience is a virtue. Let it do its thing. You'll appreciate it later. I've had stubborn prints not want to come off because of that moisture that may still be pretty dense in the clay body. So those are things to expect before peeling off. Don't get too aggravated if it's not working right away. It could be in multiple different things, but the success rate is usually pretty high. So let's go to the corner of the head and peel away to see how that's releasing. It seems to be releasing pretty well. And so I'm going to go ahead and carefully peel off the rest. And so some of the traits that I love about this technique because of the slip material and the transfer, as you can see right here, a little bit of that white slip peeled off with the paper. And you know, that distress is really nice. That process, it's not too sterile. It gives texture in it. It's right there at the top too, but it plays off with how the image wanted to crease on itself. I knew that would happen, but I didn't know how it was going to look when it came off. And I think that spontaneity is really nice. And so from here, what I would do is draw, do slip inlay, maybe use some liquid resists, incise into the surface. Another option is glazing it and using gold luster or decals. But since it's leather hard, you can still carve into the surface or add things to the surface on top of it. This doesn't have to be the end result. And I think that's really exciting for using underglaze transfers as opposed to overglaze decals or decals. So give it a try. Again, this is the new Isla Triangulos pattern with a custom spin on it with using a nice gradient of red to black. If you'd like to know anything more, please visit us at islatransfers.com under our shop or custom orders. Again, this is Jason Burnett. Thanks.